Have you ever been dating someone and it seems to be going really well, but it suddenly blows up or just kind of fizzles out over time, and you're left wondering, what happened? Well, you might have made one of these very common early dating mistakes, so I'm going to help you avoid them in the future. The first mistake so many of us make early in a relationship, especially when it's new and exciting, is doing too much too fast. The clearest example of this is physical intimacy, where a lot of us have different preferences, different values and beliefs around this, and we think that we need to engage physically more than we're actually comfortable with because that's what the other person wants. And we don't want to lose them, and we want to keep this connection going. But if you don't stay true to your own values and preferences, and you give them something they want even though you're not comfortable with it, how can they trust you going forward? And how can you trust yourself? It's important to stay true to those values and communicate them the best you can, especially early on in dating. A perfect example comes from my own relationship. On my first date with my partner, we hung out pretty much all day. It was something like 8 hours of walking around this food festival, really building a lot of connection, even holding hands sometimes. And at the end of this date, where we're feeling really connected and lots of chemistry, I walk her to her car and I tell her, "I'd really like to kiss you right now." She pauses. She looks at me and she says, "I'm not rejecting you. I just haven't kissed someone in a while, and I don't think I'm ready for that." Now here's someone who's able to communicate her preference to me. Huge green flag. And I know this person has integrity. Huge green flag. So don't let yourself give or do more than you are comfortable with or ready for early on in dating. Try to be honest with yourself about where you're at and honest with the other person, because you won't be able to sustain that throughout the next phases of a relationship. The second very common and very sneaky mistake a lot of us make early in dating is acting on our own assumptions about the other person without gaining clarity first. When some discomfort happens, which is inevitable in this phase of dating where we're kind of anxious and evaluating compatibility, discomfort will cause us to make a lot of assumptions and tell ourselves a lot of stories to make sense of that discomfort. The perfect example is the day after my first date with my partner when she said she wasn't ready to kiss me. I knew we had so much connection and chemistry, but I was still making assumptions about maybe that was all in my head. I'm telling myself this story that maybe she's not that attracted to me or the connection wasn't what I thought it was. Now, I could have made the mistake of acting on those assumptions. I could have texted her saying, "Hey, I had a great time, but I'm just not feeling the chemistry." But part of me knew that wasn't true, and I was still feeling all of this tension and some confusion. So instead, I sat with that discomfort long enough to hear past the assumptions and the stories, to feel the confusion and the tension within me. Instead of backing out, I leaned in and scheduled a second date, and the rest is history. Rather than acting on those assumptions and those stories your brain starts to use to make sense of some discomfort early on in dating, sit with it long enough to understand the emotions and the needs underlying those assumptions and those stories. This will give you most or all of the clarity that you need to know how to proceed. Another early dating mistake that I want to talk about is very similar. It involves bailing or backing out when things get uncomfortable, when conflict or disagreement happens. A disagreement will, of course, cause a lot of discomfort, especially when you are still getting to know each other and still learning how to communicate and what your preferences and styles are. Conflict just sucks, and not a lot of us are taught how to really handle it. So emotions, and therefore the stories that we use to make sense of those emotions, start to intensify. And it's very common and very tempting to act on that, to be overwhelmed by all of that emotion and that discomfort and just bail. Another example here from my own relationship. Early on, a month or two into dating, we had a series of what seemed like back-to-back conflicts, like minor disagreements. There were certain things that just didn't seem to line up, and I was very curious, so I kept asking pretty deep and pretty insightful questions to get to the bottom of these places where we didn't seem like we were lining up. She didn't really have clear answers to the questions that I was asking. So here comes my frustration and my confusion and my discomfort intensifying, and here comes my stories and my assumptions also intensifying, telling myself that she's not being honest with me, that there's something she's keeping from me, or she doesn't want to let me in. All of these stories start to feel big and overwhelming, in combination with the emotions I'm already feeling. I could have made the mistake of bailing, of simply saying, "Look, I don't want to be with someone who's not honest with me, who's not willing to share things about herself. So thank you. This has been really fun. etc. Instead, I gave myself the space to sit with all of that and regulate my emotions, be regulated enough to continue the conversation with her. Over the course of that conversation, I found out that she just didn't have answers to those questions. They were things that she hadn't really thought about before. So now we get to explore those questions together and become a lot more connected over the course of that uncomfortable conversation. This is exactly what conflict is for. So early on in your dating life, when something comes up that makes you really uncomfortable, sit with those emotions and all of the assumptions and stories long enough to know what's really going on underneath, what your needs are, what needs are not being met, and this will give you all of the clarity that you need on whether or not you want to continue navigating conflict with this person.